right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second and final Open Science Subcommittee meeting of 2025. Year has just flown by. I don't know where it's gone. Hope everybody has some good holiday plans coming up. Um, Still see some people rolling in. So why don't we just do some quick introductions? We'll go around. I'll just read off the names that I see on the list here. We can, if you could just say your name and your organization, that would be great. I'm Alex Manos. I'm the co-chair. I'm with Pinellas County Division of Environmental Management. Marcus.
Yep. Morning, everybody. Marcus Beck, other co-chair of this subcommittee, um, Tampa Bay SRA program.
Jay.
J Law, USF College of Marine Science. Be talking a little bit later on the Tampa Bay Observing Network, working with Ocean Circulation Lab, Dr. Yonggang Liu.
Heidi.
Did you say Heidi? Sorry. Okay. Hi, I'm Heidi, based in Munich, Germany. So for me, it's the afternoon. And I'm a co-founder of the Digital Research Academy and will be giving a talk today.
Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda Brinton, and I'm the founder and managing member of Environmental Stakeholder Connections.
Dr. Russell. Okay. Anna.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, Haiti. My name is Ana Carolina Peralta, and I am a marine biologist and working as a researcher at the University of South Florida.
Carter Barrett.
Hi, Barrett Carter with Geosyntech Consultants.
Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie Lopez with Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Hmm?
I think that was me. I'm Emma Dantis with Applied Ecology. I'm an environmental scientist.
Greg.
Greg, that's you.
Sorry, did hear. Greg Blanchard, Manatee County Natural Resources Department.
Gary.
You say Carrie?
Yes.
Okay,
Am I-
Carrie Flaherty-Walia, restoration ecologist at TBEP.
Michael. Sharon.
Hello, this is Michael Sharon. I'm with Manatee County Natural Resources with Greg Blanchard.
Mitch Lemon. I'm working at USF College of Marine Science with J Law.
Lewis.
Tom, you're the last one.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if what you said. Tom Rees with the Ecosphere Restoration Institute. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I think that's about everybody on the list. Good agenda for you today. Have some really good speakers coming up. First, Marcus is going to give us some of the open science updates by TBEP and partners. So, Marcus?
You said you had an announcement, Alex? Did you want to do that later or?
Yeah, I can do it now. So if some of you are familiar with the Water Atlas page, Pinellas County has in the past had a page dedicated to Pinellas County on the Water Atlas. But if you've gone there within the past month or 2 months, I think think it was in October. That page is no longer continued. That was just a place where we displayed data, but we now use our own dashboard that we've developed internally, and I'm going to drop the link to that in the chat here. So if you've gone to the county page on the Water Atlas website and you've noticed it's not there, just know that the new location for this data is at the dashboard that I've posted in the chat. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Alex. And for what it's worth, too, and I know many of you are familiar with the Water Atlas. There's different versions around depending on your organization, and Tampa Bay has one as well. A lot of the pages that were on the Pinellas County Water Atlas have migrated to the Tampa Bay Water Atlas. Not all of it, but some of it is still available through there. So if there are some things that you had used in the past through Pinellas County, you may check the Tampa Bay Water Atlas for that as well. But definitely, I want to recognize Alex for all his work with getting the Pinellas County data served up on their dashboard. I think it's a really valuable asset for the region and the data that they provide. So just wanted to highlight that as well and all of his efforts making that available. Okay, so I will give my updates as per usual. I don't want to talk too long because I know we have some really excellent speakers today. So I'll just briefly go through this. Most of the updates I have today are primarily updates on data sets that have been made available since our last meeting. And these are data sets that we as a program at TBEP use to report on status and trends of bay health. So that's really the flavor of what I'm going to be talking about today. And I think last time we met was in June. And a lot of our data products kind of come out staggered throughout the year, depending on when the monitoring is completed and when the data gets processed and QC'd and made available to the broader public and us. So I'm going to go through some of those updates. I always start with this roles and responsibilities slide just to remind everybody that we do have a document that describes our purpose as a subcommittee within the broader Technical Advisory Committee of TBEP. So if you're not familiar with that, have a look at that document. But our goal is generally just to spread the love of open science and what it can provide to yourself as a researcher or environmental professional, and how it can be used to, I think propel science forward for informing decision making. That's the idea there. So first update I have is I know many of you are familiar with our annual seagrass transect monitoring program. This is something that the estuary program facilitates, but it's really a collection of partner agencies that go out and monitor these transects each year. And so every year we get a slug of data from everybody that's gone out into the bay and run these transects for the seagrass species that are out there. And so we recently just finished the 2025 round of monitoring. Sheila Scalero, my colleague here at the estuary program, has finished QCing those data sets, and now they're available through the Water Atlas, but served up on our seagrass transect dashboard here. So if you want to have a look at that, you can see how the numbers shake out for this year compared to last. This is just showing, in this white line here, total frequency occurrence of seagrass for the bay in its entirety. And you see a nice little sort of uptick, which is a promising trend in the other direction compared to the last couple of years where we've at least seen, declines in seagrass and some of our other mapping products. This is a breakdown by the major bay segments of Tampa Bay, Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough, Middle, and Lower Tampa Bay. And this is showing you the same thing, basically total frequency occurrence of all species, primarily shoalgrass, manatee, and turtlegrass. But I've color coded these points to show whether or not the total frequency occurrence has gone up or gone down in different years, and so red being gone down from the previous year, green being going up. And the point I want to make here is that for most of the base segments, we're seeing a good increase, at least, not a large increase, but nonetheless, what looks like a positive trend in seagrass frequency occurrence, particularly in Hillsborough Bay. But I'll point out as well that Hillsborough Bay historically has the lowest coverage of seagrass compared to the other bay segments. So it's not a large gain in coverage, but just a slight uptick in frequency occurrence. And I'll also remind you that this is one product of a couple that we use to assess seagrass, the other primary one being the aerial cover maps from the Water Management District. We got an update from that earlier this year that showed similar upticks in seagrass cover, but Old Tampa Bay still showed a decline in total cover. But these annual products we get from the Seagrass Transect monitoring program kind of fills the gaps between years when we are waiting on the updates of the maps from the Water Management District. So complementary line of evidence here when we're looking at seagrass change that does suggest a trend in the right direction, but still something we're keeping an eye on. This is just a breakdown by the individual transects to give you a sense of how these things may have changed by individual transect. I won't dwell on this too much, but this is kind of a new mapping product that I ginned up this year, showing you the change from last year to this year by transect. And I'm still working out, whether or not this is the best way to show this information, because some of these transects, for example, this looks like, a big gain, but this is a transect where there's not been a lot of seagrass at all over the last couple of years. So this increase looks like a lot, but it's pretty minor for this part of the bay overall. But you can kind of get a spatial sense of how these transects are playing out from this year compared to the last. Next update we've had since our last meeting is the Nectin dashboard, which is essentially a tool to track fisheries in the bay. And we get this data from FWC, and we typically get this updated late summer. And this is going to be data from the year prior. So when we get data from this year, it's going to be from 2024. It takes about 6 months or so to get that actually processed and sent to us. This is obviously served up on the dashboard as well, so you can check out this link to see the updates there. This is kind of an interesting story to tell with what has changed from 2023 to 2024. For the most part, it's been fairly stable is kind of the narrative we're telling. There's been some changes. Looks like Old Tampa Bay has gone from stay the course to caution, and Lower Tampa Bay has gone from caution to stay the course. We're not really looking too much into that, but let me just refresh this real quick. So this is the long-term time series for that same report card, but showing the actual scores by bay segment. And I just want to draw your attention. So these three lines here, this is Lower Tampa Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, and then the smaller gray dash line is Old Tampa Bay. Looks like Hillsborough Bay right here took quite a bit of a dive right here. If you look at the score, let me just isolate that. This, I think, we did look into the data a little bit, and we kind of came to the conclusion that this isn't necessarily a notable ecological change. Rather, we think that some of the samples that were taken there were at sites where there actually was no seagrass and not a good fish community that was sampled. And that just kind of happens sometimes from year to year. You get the luck of the draw where you're sampling at a place where there's just not a lot of fish, and that is reflected in the score. So for the most part, we're kind of just saying that fisheries has been relatively stable from 2024 to 2025 with this new update. Carrie, I'm going to call you out, Carrie Walia, Flardy Walia. If there's anything else I missed about the Necton dashboard. I think we're kind of just
We did actually, Marcus said we looked into the data a little bit. We actually looked into it in detail to make sure that that was not a decline to be worried about. Initially, when you think about 2024, your mind goes right to the hurricanes, like, oh, was there an impact of the hurricanes? And, so we looked at monthly trends in cash per unit effort and a lot of other things. And those low numbers were actually driven by the winter months, so like January, February, March, which is normally when you see low diversity in the fish communities anyway. So you add that on top of, the sites happen to fall out in areas where, there wasn't a high coverage of seagrass, and then you end up with that. So we looked at it from a lot of different angles. Not only that, we looked at lag times to see if, maybe there was some kind of lagging impact of the storms. We really couldn't find anything. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next year, and maybe if that was just, a blip. So if you have additional questions, we can talk about it and show additional information. But
thanks. Yeah, Carrie is our resident fish expert, so if you have any fish questions, definitely direct them to her. But again, this is not necessarily something we're overly concerned about. It may be just a product of where the sampling was and just an off year for that. At any rate, next dashboard update was the scallop search dashboard. If you know about the scallop search, this is pretty much a participatory science effort organized by Tampa Bay Watch, and we also co-organize it as well. But it's really our best record of scallops in Tampa Bay, and it's folks go out one day in the year in August, and I think it was in August. They go to one of these hexagons and look for scallops, basically. And this is really our best guess at how the scallops are doing in the bay. And so that data was updated, I think 2 months after our last meeting. And just to show you, these are the trends for all the years this has been going on. Total scallops kind of down a little bit from the previous year. Less people were looking, but if you sort of scale that by scallops per boat, it looks like there is sort of a slight decline from this year compared to the last. But definitely have a look at that and see where, if you want to go look for scallops in the bay, this might be a good resource to check out. Then let's see, I lost my presentation there. Okay. And last data update is if you guys are familiar with the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium, this is our group that we convene that is responsible for tracking and I guess mitigating sources of nitrogen to the bay. And one key data product that comes out of that group is load estimates of total nutrient load to each bay segment by year. And we recently got updates for that. I think earlier this year, or actually a couple months ago, filling in gaps from 2022, 2023, and 2024. So if you have any interest in how nutrient loads are trending in the bay, you can go to this dashboard that we curate on our webpage. I just updated this last week, I think, with those numbers, so you can get a sense of how that's trending recently. Last update I have, not necessarily a data product or dashboard update. I do want to call out again the Water Atlas. I've been bugging them for years to develop an API that serves up their data in a way that can be accessed through a web endpoint. As many of you know, you can access Water Atlas data through their form-based entry system, which is convenient for one-offs. But if you're like me and you want to programmatically access and ping this data frequently, having an API is very useful for that. So we worked with them earlier this year, and they actually did serve up an API that works very well. Just wanted to call your attention to that. If you are in the business of pinging APIs, this is what it looks like. It's essentially a web page where you send a URL request and you get data back, and you can access that through your programming language of choice or other ways that APIs can be accessed. So what it looks like is this is the documentation for it, but essentially there's different URLs that you can query, and you get a return that looks like this. And this might not look like a whole lot, but this is something a computer can access easily, that you can pull down locally to your own desktop to get this information. So that's a great resource. And I also want to mention that I did take some time to incorporate some R functions into our R package to query this API in a more, if you're familiar with using R, this might be an easier way to access that information rather than building, a workflow on your own to access this API. So if you go to the documentation here on our webpage for TBEP tools, you can see some information about how to use that. I'll just have a little small or short script that I want to show you how easy it is to pull this information. Not that one. Hold on. Okay, so this is in my local programming environment. I'm loading the. Let me just zoom in. So you can see that a little bit better. So if I was to load the R package, I can do that like that. And then there's actually two functions I put in here. There's one called util import wqwa. That's sort of a utility type function that gets you some metadata about what's in the water atlas. So there's different things you could put in here. So if you put in parameters as the argument, you can get a list of all the parameters that you could query from the water atlas. Or if I wanted to look at a list of all the water bodies that are in there, I could do that. And so it's, almost 13,000 water bodies that are recorded in the water atlas. Based on the ID for the water body, I can then figure out what stations are in. I'm sorry. Yeah, I can figure out what stations are in that water body. So here's everything that's in Hillsborough Bay. So I can very quickly see these are the number of stations. In this case, it's about 415. But if you want to get data from a particular organization, this is where I see the real value, because a lot of times I need data from like Pinellas County, and I don't want to go to the form entry system to get that because I have these workflows built around sort of programmatically pinging the APIs. Now I can use this tool to pull in all of the data from Pinellas County, and this is using this function, read import wqwa. Water quality, water atlas is what that stands for. You can look at the documentation there. That's also that web page I linked earlier. But if I put in the data source, this is going to be the identifier for Pinellas County. The parameter here, I'm looking at chlorophyll, and then the start and end date of the data I want to pull. I can run that, and it takes a few seconds. I get basically a month's worth of data that's in the water atlas right there. I get, let's see, well, you can see all the columns there, but basically chlorophyll data that have been sampled by Pinellas County for that month. So I'm, nerding out about this. I'm very excited that this is finally available. Like I said, I've been bugging Water Atlas for a long time to create an API. If you guys are API adjacent like me, definitely look up the tools, and definitely let Water Atlas know that this is awesome, because I don't know if anybody's using this besides me, but I find it really valuable, and show them some love for putting this together. I'll wrap up quickly. Just want to put together I always put a list of tools, trainings, and good reads that I find in between our meetings that I think are useful. I gave an R training at the surf meeting last month, yeah, November, that if you want to get up to speed with R, that's a good tool there. I also went to PositConf in September, which is the company that develops R Studio, and Positron, which is the IDE I just showed. All of those talks are now on YouTube, including mine. If you want to hear me talk about data science and Piney Point, you can check that out. And then there's some other things here that are some interesting things that I came across that you can click through on your own time. So I'll leave it at that. I want to give plenty of time to our speakers before I hand it off to, I think, Jay, you're first. Yep. I'll pause there if there's any questions, comments, concerns about these updates. I'll pause for a second. All copacetic? Okay. Jay, how you feeling? You ready to go?
I am ready. I'll just go ahead and share my screen.
Yep. Maybe you need to give you permissions. Oh, looks like you got it.
All right.
So while he gets set up, I just want to say Jay's going to talk about T-Bon, all about that. Also, really awesome. We have had speakers at the TAC, our Technical Advisory Committee, talk about T-Bon in the past. But I wanted to give Jay another opportunity here to talk about it because I think it's a really valuable data source for our region. So again, this group being open science and data science adjacent, I think really needs to understand the value of this program for what it can provide for our understanding of Tampa Bay, because it fills a really important data gap. So I will shut up and let Jay talk more about it.
Thank you, Marcus. Are you guys seeing my presenter view? I think I have this
Yes.
set up on the correct screen. Okay. Yeah, so as Marcus mentioned, well, first of all, thank you, Marcus and Estuary Program for having me here. As you mentioned, we did have a talk about this with the TAC last year. We did that talk while we were on cruise and we had some connection issues. So I'm going to kind of hit on some of the things that we spoke about as far as, kind of the origin story of T-Bon and then move into the data dashboard. Want to keep it informal. If you guys have any questions, please just interrupt. If I don't see your hand, feel free to unmute and just ask questions and we'll just move through it that way. So Tampa Bay Observing Network, it's an array of real-time water quality sensors co-located with current meters in Tampa Bay. I've got the QR code up here. Feel free to explore the website as I'm going through the talk. This project is led by the Ocean Circulation Lab under Dr. Yonggang Liu. The funding was provided by FDEP and support from Estuary Program and highly leveraged from NOAA, IU's, and Socorro. Socorro is the Southeast Coastal Ocean Observing Regional Association, of which we're a part, and they support our work on the West Florida Shelf. I'll be talking a little bit about that program as well. My name is Jay Law, as you guys all know. Did my master's here at the College of Marine Science a number of years ago. I've been working in the Ocean Circulation Lab for about 20 years. I'm a physical oceanographer by training, but really in reality, kind of a mooring technician, logistics manager, just work on keeping all of our instrumentation in the water, planning field work, breaking down from field work on the day-to-day. Quick outline. Just a little background on the collection of capabilities that it takes to maintain these types of observations, particularly with the real time. I want to spend a little time going through what T-Bon is, what it was when we first put it in the water, why it changed, what it looks like now, and then touch briefly on QA/QC, primarily the real-time QA/QC that we do on the data. Do an overview of some of the ongoing research applications. And then at the end, I'd like to kind of completely unscripted, just pull up the website and show you the data dashboard and kind of the data queries that you can do to take a look at this data and maybe pick an interesting event. Again, it's kind of unscripted. I'll just go through an event from last year that has comprehensive set of data from these sites and just kind of look at what you can do playing around with the data and see the kind of stories it can tell. Just doing some exploring. Oops, sorry, somehow turned off. There we go. So it really takes a village for this kind of an operation. Number of stations in the water. The project is led by the Ocean Circulation Lab. As I mentioned, principal investigator Dr. Yonggang Liu. Project actually started under Bob Weisberg before he retired in 2021. Bob founded and led our Ocean Circulation Lab for a number of years. It started back in the early 90s. We have two technicians really right now working on this project, myself and Mitch Lemon, who's come on in the last few months. We have engineers, computer engineers, electrical engineers. We have a full service machine shop, a number of modelers and data analysts, and in particular graduate students and undergraduate students who all make this work possible. It's really a diverse team that it takes to do this kind of thing. We have support from through the Flood Hub and our Ocean Technology Group, which is a collection of engineers here at the college that help bring these kind of science plans into reality. So backing up a little bit, taking kind of like a mile-high view on our group, the Ocean Circulation Lab. In implementing T-bond, we followed a blueprint that really we've established, our group has established. It started under Bob Weisberg back in the 90s in response to what many of you may have heard of as the no-name storm of the century in the early 90s, which really just showed how our west coast of Florida was really unprepared from an observing standpoint for extreme weather events. The COMPS program was initiated in the late 90s. It's grown throughout the years. The main thing I want to underscore is it follows the philosophy that Bob Weisberg laid down years ago, and that observations inform modeling. And out of those two, that back and forth between those two, you can have useful applications of those observing and modeling efforts. But it's really it's a system rooted in sound science, experimental design, but it really takes the engineering, the fabrication, and the field expertise to get things like this in the water, to maintain it, to get quality data, and keep that quality data coming in. And really, it underscores the importance of these long-term data sets and the effort that it takes to do them. Here's just a couple quick snips of this is our COMPS website. Again, there's a QR code there. Website is down in the corner. If you want to explore while I'm talking, please feel free. This page is going to look very similar to our T-bond page, which I'll get to in a few minutes. It's designed by Second Creek Consulting out of, I believe, South Carolina. They also designed a website for UNCW. They have a real-time network, Indian River Lagoon. They do a really nice job with these types of real-time websites. So big pictures, we have a network of real-time moorings on the West Florida shelf, transmitting quality in-water data, meteorological data. We've been doing that for a number of years, actually close to 3 decades. And again, talking about comps, I want to mention a paper that some work that Dr. Liu published on about a year ago on Hurricane Ian. As most of you, I'm sure, are aware, Hurricane Ian crossed the shelf in 2022, rapidly intensified from a 3 to a 5. And some work that Yonggang did on looking at our long-term data records of temperature and salinity, comparing sea surface temperature to water column temperature, and the importance of distinguishing between those two really shows the value of these sustained observations. As I mentioned, these buoy data we've had these buoys in the water for some going on almost 3 decades, 25, 26 years. So what you're seeing here on the left panel, we have the sea surface temperature. So that's the 1 meter temperature at 3 locations on the shelf from sites that we've had in the water for, upwards of 25 years. The gray lines in the background are the individual years of data. So that builds up our climatology, our climatological mean, which is the dark black line. And it shows that when Ian crossed the shelf, the surface waters were anomalously warm by about 1 degree, so it's significant. But the most important thing, if you look at our long-term data set on the right panel, you look at the data or the temperatures from 20 and 30 meters at 2 of our buoys located on the 50-meter isobath. And you'll see the red line is that year's data, so 2022, when Ian crossed the shelf, and that was significantly higher than the mean, so several degrees higher. So it underscores 2 things, and I include this because it emphasizes the importance of these long-term data sets, the importance of maintaining them. It costs money, it costs time. It's not easy, but you need to have these long-term time series in order to say something sensible about when things are anomalous. So, when we had Hurricane Ian cross the shelf, just looking at satellite data, sea surface temperature data doesn't tell the whole story. You need to have these, in situ observations, particularly in real time, to kind of tell these types of stories where you're looking at the subsurface temperatures, and that's the heat content really in the whole water column. So without those buoys out there, you just don't have that information. So this is a product that our lab and Dr. Kylie Kuo and others have put as a real-time product. If you go to our website, again, QR code, this would take you right to the web page where we're doing this. So really important during hurricane season, 2 of our sites on the 50-meter isobath, you can click on those red dots and you can see in real time, what the red lines that you're seeing are the observations from this year overlaid on the historical climatologies based on upwards of 20 years of data. So what you see here is so the left panel is our C13 mooring, which is to the south. The right one is C12, which is a little to the north. And you see that this past summer, this year, temperatures haven't been, anomalously warm compared to the mean. And in some cases at depth, they've actually been a little lower than the mean. Now, we didn't have a hurricane cross the shelf, so can't really test that hypothesis, but, it's good to know going in. So again, this is an example of how long-term data sets are really important for, a number of societal applications. So back to Piney Point, I'm sure all of you are very aware of Piney Point back in 2021. Just want to mention this is how we got into observations of water quality and in Tampa Bay. As you all know, 200 million gallons were pumped into Tampa Bay via Port Manatee and through Bishop Harbor after a tear in one of the liners of the phosphogypsum wastewater contaminant reservoirs. Our group assisted in the emergency response, particularly Yongang, with a model product from our high-resolution TBCOM model, Tampa Bay Coastal Ocean Model. It's a model that's been developed over the last 15 years for Tampa Bay. Yongang and others worked really closely with emergency management as the emergency unfolded in the emergency response, helping to inform where to sample, where was the water going, the contaminant water going based on the circulation model. So out of that work, we were funded to do 2 things. So we used the model to look at where the water was going, to see, to inform the response. But answering the question of how realistic is the model working, particularly in the shallower areas, we wanted to do a model veracity test. So we proposed deploying a number of ADCPs, so acoustic Doppler current profilers in Tampa Bay, particularly outside of the channel, where circulation isn't quite as strong. And also, while doing that, co-locating those ADCPs with real-time water quality sensors So building on our experience from an engineering field and maintenance standpoint of real-time systems, deploying water quality sensors in the bay. So in 2022, we were able to deploy 5 current meters, as I've shown here. Upper right, TB1, 2, 3, and 4 are co-located with water quality stations, which I'll get to in the next stage, the next slide. And then one station south of Skyway, TB6. So at present, we have a little over 3 years worth of data. This is actually data that I'm working on as best I can for my PhD dissertation. What I've shown here is just the record length of QA/QC data. I'm kind of in the middle of doing an in-depth QA of that data right now. But we have almost 3.5 years of data. So we're getting to the point where, we can go beyond just taking a look at a mean and seasonal, look at the circulation and start to do some comparisons to the model fields. So here, what I'm showing is moving on to the water quality side of the T-bond. So this is a typical, what I would call a typical T-bond water quality station. We work together with the Coast Guard. We have a good relationship with them. We secured permits to put gear on range towers in Tampa Bay. And if you've ever been out in Tampa Bay, you may have noticed there's quite a few of these, especially in middle and lower Tampa Bay. There's over 20 of them. So we were able to find locations that were, suitable for what we were looking for or looking at. So what we did was we outfitted these towers with a weather station on the top. It was just a GIL multi-parameter weather station, GMX 500. It measures winds, relative humidity, barometric pressure, and air temperature. And then real-time telemetry. So with a Campbell Scientific platform, a Campbell Scientific logger, and AT&T cell modem for transmitting the real-time data. It's powered with a solar panel and a solar battery. And really the workhorse of the whole system is the YSI XO2 water quality sonde. This is a multi-parameter sonde. Sonde is kind of the brains of the instrument. And then there's a variety of probes that you can put into the sonde or attach to the sonde and measure various things. So we're using a standard 6 probes for salinity and temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, what they call a total algae sensor, which measures chlorophyll A and phycoerythrin. And then we've just started putting out a couple of FDOM probes on a couple of sites. And what I've shown down in the right, you can see the YSI, these get a laser pointer. So these are the YSI sondes. This is a Nortec Signature 1000 ADCP that we use in bottom-mounted ADCPs in a concrete rack. And then here's our electronics enclosure, which we mount on the tower itself. So what I call T-bond version 1.0, this is in response to the Piney Point emergency catastrophe, really. So all of our stations were located near the outfall of Piney Point. So we had five stations initially. We deployed these in 2022 to 2023. 4 of them on Coast Guard towers, as are shown here on the map, and then 1 here at the College of Marine Science on the seawall, which happens to be at right where the Salt Creek flows into Bayboro Harbor. Again, want to point out as part of our workflow, we include our graduate students and even undergraduates. It's kind of a necessary part of our workforce. So a lot of this work was done by graduate students. 2 graduate students here. This is just from last week, mounting a stilling well on one of our stations. We use it as it's experiential learning, but it's also really a critical part of handling what really is a pretty large workload in deploying and maintaining all of these stations. So moving on to last year, we had 5 stations in the bay. And then Milton came along, and we no longer had 5 stations. So what I'm showing here in the upper left is this is just using our query builder, which I'm going to get to on our website. I'm just showing the wind data from 3 of our stations for the from September and October of last year of 2024. And you see the peak in wind speed. The first one is Helene. So our station survived, did really well through Helene. Everything survived. We got data throughout that storm. We had one dropout, but it was really more due to some of the flooding and a dropout of servers. Milton, not so much. Milton came through, really strong wind event, and it actually destroyed 2 of our stations. On the lower left, I'm showing what is our TB3 station. So the inset photo is what it used to look like. The picture shows after Milton, it knocked off the superstructure, so we lost our MET station, all of our telemetry. We were able to recover the sonde, but the station hasn't been repaired, so we lost that station. Our TB2 station completely destroyed when we went out to survey all of our sites for damage after the storm. It was gone. It wasn't even there. So what you see here is a side scan of the charter vessel that we were on. We were able to locate the wreckage of the range tower and let the Coast Guard know where that was. We were able to dive on it and recover the sonde, so we did get some data back on that. So for about a year or so, well, I guess about 6 months, we were down to 3 stations. We were able to secure some funding from FDEP to put those 2 stations that were destroyed back out. And in collaborating with SRA program, in some ways it provided an opportunity to, take a big picture look at where we were making these observations. And if we were going to put 2 stations back in, it didn't make sense to be oversampling in middle and lower Tampa Bay, but rather to locate those in more impacted areas. So we've added 1 station at what we call TB7 now, which is in Bishop Harbor near where Piney Point is, and that's where the wastewater would come out of. We mounted that on a piling. There are no range towers back in that shallow area. Up here on the upper left, here's a picture of Sam D'Angelo, one of our graduate students, helping to install that. It's actually kind of nice to be able to use a step ladder at a site where it's only like 5 or 6 feet deep. So that station went in last spring, and then we also added a station up in Hillsborough Bay, what we call TB8. That is mounted on a Coast Guard tower. And the other 3 pictures show the installation of that. So these are all students, in climbing gear, putting the electronics on the tower, mounting the MET sensor on the top. And this is our RV Tocobaga, new vessel at the College of Marine Science with Steve Morosky's group. Really good platform to work off for these types of services. And what will become kind of version 4.0 is Yongang did recently receive some funding from Hillsborough County to put a station up in Old Tampa Bay. So we've been talking with Estuary Program on where to locate that. One of the constraints up in Old Tampa Bay is there are no towers, there are no pilings, really. There are no channels up there. It's pretty much just all kind of the same depth up there. So there aren't any existing structures other than bridges to mount things to. So we're going to have to get a little creative in how we do it, but we're looking at probably the Bayside Bridge over here on the western part of Old Tampa Bay, where we know that there are serious water quality issues with long residence times. So that's most likely where that's going to go. So at that point, we would have 6 stations in the bay. So here's what it looks like right now before the new station goes in. This is our website, which we'll be moving on to. So talking a little bit about data quality assurance, QA/QC. We so we come at this from having experience on the West Florida shelf, as I mentioned, but ADCPs and CTDs and even MET sensors real time. It's a bit of a different animal than these water quality sensors. The water quality sensors, many of them are optical sensors. And when you're deploying those in Tampa Bay, where you have a lot of biofouling, it presents some really unique challenges. So we've assembled our own T-bond handbook based on the National Estuarine Research Reserve System Water Quality Monitoring SOP. So not following it explicitly, but that's a very detailed SOP that NERS worked with YSI specifically on developing for their applications. So we've adopted that into our own, and our students have worked on putting together a really detailed T-bond handbook of all of our SOPs. So that combined with applying kind of our own lessons learned for Tampa Bay dictates our quality assurance. And just a quick summary, so for our water quality SONs, we find that 3 to 4 weeks, a 3 to 4 work service interval is required, particularly in the summer. This last summer wasn't quite so bad, but the summer before with all the rain, in 2024, we saw a lot of biofouling. With the ADCPs, 3 to 4 months is okay. Initially, we had planned for 6 months, and we found that the biofouling after 4 months gets pretty bad at some locations and can actually lead to some data loss, which, I have a couple pictures shown on the right. The ADCP, the one in the lower right here, is from our first deployment. We put it out for 6 months, and we found, that's too long. So if you, after about 3 or 4, if you keep it under 3 months or 4 months, really, you won't see as much biofouling. Couple of other kind of lessons learned, following the SOPs from NERS, but also adding our own procedures, individually wrapping the SONs with copper tape or all the probes themselves. It's takes a fair bit of time. It's very tedious, but it does help with the biofouling. And we've been able to stretch. That's how we've been able to stretch things out for about a month on our intervals. And recently, we have been switching everything over, our stilling wells over from PVC to copper pipe. So up in the upper right, here's one of our students using a plasma torch to cut the ventilation holes so that you get water flow through the pipe, through the stilling well. Copper is expensive, but as it turns out, the PVC really led to a lot of problems. The SON would be reporting good data, but it basically just gets stuck in there. You get so much growth on the inside of these pipes that you can't get it out without diving on it. So that leads to extra cost, extra vessel time. So it really is a cost savings to go to the copper pipe. It helps with the biofouling. Another kind of a low-tech lesson learned is regular cleaning of solar panels, particularly if you don't have a lot of rain. Solar panels get dirty with bird poop, and then you can literally watch the batteries just go down. So once we start seeing a battery go down, start to lose its power, we know we got to get out there with a small boat and climb a tower and squeegee off a solar panel. Lastly, for our to be able to maintain this from a group of our size, again, constantly integrating students, undergraduate students particularly, into the training and workflow is really critical to maintaining this. So we have a number of programs, internship programs and things that we work with to try to attract good quality students and pay them accordingly for the work that they're doing. So it's a win-win really for them. They get really incredible experiential education, and then we're getting you get really, really quality students doing really good work. Okay, so moving on to the quality assurance, QA/QC, and really just the real time is what I wanted to talk about mainly. What we call CORTOD is quality assurance of real-time oceanographic data. It's a standardization of procedures developed by NOAA, Integrated Ocean Observing System. And as I mentioned before, we have significant funding from SOCORA, the Southeast Coastal Ocean Observing Regional Association. And Jeff Donovan, our systems admin, computer engineer, has spent a lot of time over the years working with NOAA and IUs on these CORTOD manuals, standardizing procedures for our comps, West Florida shelf data. So we've applied that system that we have in place on our comp system to the T-bond system. And the way it works basically is every day, every night at about midnight, we'll get an email. We have Mitch, myself, a couple of the students, and Jeff are all on an email that goes out that lists all the data, whether it's flagged or not, for the previous 24 hours. So this is actually a snip from last night. This came in around midnight. Take a look at the email. In the right column, you see most things. There's nothing suspect. That's good news. So the automated flags no automated flags have been generated based on timing tests, syntax tests. So timing is just, did it come in at the right time? Syntax, are there any parity bit errors or anything? Location, is it in the right location? Range is instrument range. So what is the manufacturer's instrument range? If it's outside of that, then it should be flagged. We are not doing climatology tests on this data as yet. We just don't quite have the data, the time series for that. It does a spike test, rate of change test, and then a flatline test. So clicking on our depth, SON depth, 2% of the data was flagged. And so we click on that email. In the body of the email, that pulls up our data quality dashboard. You click on the actual flag value and it pulls up a little plot of the most recent observations. And what you see is that it's flagged it just because the last 3 or 4 samples were exactly the same. So it was high tide, so the tide just plateaued. So those would be marked as valid, but again, it just, for some of these, for some of the flags, there's only so much you can automate. So you really do have to be looking at this every day. And second example is the phycoerythrin. 35% of those were flagged as bad. You click on it, pull up a plot, and what you see is it failed the instrument range test. So, and that's because a number of the observations were below 0, which should not be possible for concentration. However, these are instruments that are calibrated in the lab. Sometimes the calibration can shift low. So basically what you're seeing is almost no phycoerythrin or no phycoerythrin. The instrument's reading it as slightly negative. So we would flag those appropriately. But again, it takes, you don't want to throw that data out because it basically shows that the whole record from that instrument is just shifted down slightly because of the calibration. So we do that every day with our real-time data to generate those flags in the real-time database. All of these instruments, the ADCPs, the SONs, and the meteorological sensors are all downloaded routinely. So every time we recover an ADCP, which is on a 3-4 month interval, we download that data and then go through a pretty rigorous QA/QC procedure. That's a procedure we've had to develop in the last year or two for these sensors, for the ADCP sensors. These are new sensors that we purchased. There's some proprietary software that we've used to go through that, and then we write some MATLAB code. I'm working on that right now, actually, on fine-tuning, really in-depth QA/QC procedures where you're just looking through the data, going beyond the automated kind of QA/QC. Same thing with the water quality SONs. Every time, we're recovering these monthly. We take them back to the lab, download them so that we can fill any gaps in the real-time data. But then also we're going through, Dr. Kylie Kuo has written some MATLAB code to run some automated looks at the data and then also plot it up and really just put an experienced eye on it is what it takes. So that takes a significant amount of time. We are working on making this a bit more standard in the lab. Some of it's just bandwidth with the personnel that we have. We have a lot going on. currently the downloaded and further QA/QC data where we're tying this into a longer time series. We have a few projects going on with that, so so research type projects, including the ADCP data that I'm working on. There's a paper by Dr. Bo Yang, he's working on a machine learning analysis that Marcus has been collaborating on, looking at the T-bond data and EPC historical nutrient data. We expect that probably will come out in a publication in the coming months. And then we have a number of folks working on detailed analyses of the Tampa Bay response to some of the hurricanes from last year. So in the T-bond water quality data, meteorological data, and possibly even the ADCP data. None of that's ready for really presentation yet, but we would hope that it will be soon. Okay, so now here's the unscripted part. If I have time, Marcus, am I running long?
Yeah, if you have like a minute or two just to show this, I want to make sure we give Heidi enough time.
Yes, I can do that. So real quick, and you all can do this on your own. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So here's our website, real-time data website. I'm just going to show you how to access the our data dashboard and query builder. So if I were interested in looking at any particular period of time, I would just go to the download data and click on our query builder. Just to access the query builder, I can put in a custom date range. And what I'd like to show is something interesting, which if we go back to last year, end of July and beginning of August, apply that date range. Okay. It's automatically going to come up with TB1's water temperature because it has to plot something when you click on that. So we take that off and let's look at the chlorophyll. From these 3 stations, and then we also have a precipitation sensor on 2 of our stations. So let's just take a quick look at that, and then I'll sign off. So this is something that we are working on writing up. So what we're seeing here in the yellow line, this is precipitation, and the way the sensor works is it does total precipitation, so it adds a rate up over the day, and then it resets to 0 at midnight. So what you're seeing here is total precipitation of 300 millimeters, but then it resets to 0, but really it's just continuing on into the next day. And if you add those together, it's about 14 inches, which is what Debbie dumped on the region last year. And one of the interesting things, and again, this is just an example of the kind of stories you can tell with these data, really at your fingertips, just exploring the real-time data sets is, after about 4 or 5 days, we saw an uptick in all of our stations with chlorophyll after all of that rain. Basic, right? But this is 4 different stations where we have that data coming in real time. So there's other things you can tell with this. I think I'm running a little long, so I'll leave it there. But I had a thank you slide, but I think I could summarize that myself just by saying thanks to FDEP and SRA program for the funding for this, and all the leverage funding that we receive, NOAA, Socorro, and again, the support from the college this is an Ocean Circulation Lab effort, but it really doesn't happen without engineers, machinists, students all really working together on doing this. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jay. I want to thank you and everybody at T-Bond for standing up this really valuable monitoring program. And I'll say one more thing before I hand it off to Heidi. You know, if you are using T-Bond data, let them know and you know, have some great examples of how this is a really valuable asset for our region because it's been a long time coming. You know, relatively speaking, it's a new program that I'm hoping we can continue for many more years to come. So showing the value of this information is really critical to securing the support for T-Bond into the future. So thank you, Jay, and the rest of the group. All right, let's transition to Heidi now. I want to make sure she has enough time. Um, I've been trying to get Heidi to speak to this group for about a year now, so this conversation has been ongoing for quite some time, but I'm really excited to have her here. She's been a champion in her own right for you know, getting people up to speed on open science and how it can really accelerate the value of data and research and how it's used for decision making. So she's going to talk about her work there, and I think there's a lot of implications for what she's been doing with you know, our small corner over here in Tampa Bay, and so there's some lessons learned that I think that we can take from her work. So, without further ado, I will hand it over to Heidi.
Well, thank you, Marcus, and thank you all for having me finally here today. So maybe a little bit about my background before I start with the presentation. So I'm a data scientist by background, so I studied statistics and then did a PhD in biostatistics. So very technical, geeky work that I've done in the past. But my interest in open science started really pretty early on when I did my first research project, and I was really, really confused about the way people keep their data to themselves and keep their manuscripts to themselves, because I always felt like sharing is the way we create knowledge in the world, right? Because we need to stand upon each other's shoulders to be able to get to the next increment of knowledge. And I never understood why people would like try to stop that by keeping stuff to themselves. And I never really changed that opinion, even though I understand like certain pressures in certain fields and stuff like that. But I still feel like being open and collaborative is the way to go. And so today I co-executive director of a small company that's called Digital Research Academy, and we train researchers to work openly and reproducibly and using data and code. So it's really I really made this idea of working open and collaboratively into my job. And when Marcus and I talked about your group here, I was like, okay, so a lot of these people are public servants, and I've been working for wow, more than 3 years now on a project that's called ADA, and ADA stands for Applied Data Analysis for the Public Sector. And I want to talk about that today. Although my like general work is more focused towards researchers, this work is really focused towards public servants and public offices here in Bavaria, Germany, where I live. And so just to get that all into perspective a little bit. So let me share my screen and start my slideshow. All right. So the title of this talk is How Can Public Offices Solve Problems by Making Their Data Fair? And this is just a little bit of giving inspiration of like how different problems always tie in with this idea of fair data. And I'm gonna explain in a little bit what I mean when I say fair data. All right. So challenges that we see in public administrations, a lot of them or some of them can be solved with data. And I'm not saying that data is always the solution. I'm just saying that sometimes it is. And when it is, then I'm happy to help. So projects that we've been working on are with the Bavarian National Park, where we talked about how can we detect trees from drone images, or things like with the stately archives, which ask the question, which files should we archive for the long run? And when they say archive, they really mean like forever, right? So this is a big decision. Or the most recent project that we've been working on is about the question, how can we generate gender equality reports? And all of these questions are very, very different, but all of them have a data component that I want to talk about today. So I already promised that I was going to explain what I mean when I say FAIR data. So FAIR is an acronym, and it stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And since that is not enough of an explanation of what I actually mean when I say that, I like to describe FAIR as the answer to questions. So when your data is fair, you are able to answer the question, where is the data? You're able to question, how can I access it? You are able to answer the question, how can I read and work with the data? And also, how can I reuse the data? And I thought that Marcus's example earlier with the water atlas data was a particularly good example, actually, to explain fair data, because the data was reasonably fair before they had the API, right? So the data was findable on the internet. It was clear how you could access it. It was in a format that wasn't totally obscure, so you were able to download it. And it was reusable in the sense that, yeah, you could download it several times and for several different time frames and so on. But now it's even more fair with the API because it increases accessibility, because you don't have to click through the website anymore, but can access it programmatically. It's more interoperable because you can access it from different programming languages directly, and it's even more reusable because of that. So it's a nice example, I think, of how fair is not a binary thing. It's not either your data is fair or it's not fair, but rather it's a scale, and you can always think of how can I improve the fairness of my data? One thing that I find important to note is, especially in an open science context, that fair data and open data is not the same thing. So data can be fair and open, but fair data doesn't necessarily need to be open, and open data is not always fair. So for example, a fair data set could be a data set that you can't share with everybody, so accessibility is maybe low, but it's still fair because you can explain how people can, for example, apply to work with the data. And so it is fair, but it's definitely not openly available on the internet, right? So there's a difference between those two. And I love it when it's both fair and open, but if it can't be open, then we can at least think about whether we could make it reasonably fair, nevertheless. All right. If you have any questions throughout this talk, by the way, feel free to speak up. I like being interrupted. If I don't finish the slides, I don't care. So that's totally fine. All right. So I mentioned that I'm involved in this project called ADA, where we're supporting the public sector with data projects. And the funny thing about that is it's a Bavarian German-based project, but the way it started was actually through what's called the Coleridge Initiative, which is a US project. So Coleridge is a nonprofit organization working with governments in the US and public offices in the US to use data more effectively and especially with a focus on public decision making. So they have infrastructure for this, and they offer trainings to enable government workers to use this infrastructure where you can basically also like access R or other tools that you want to use for your data analysis projects. So if you go to coleridgeinitiative.org, you can find the US-based initiative that we're like a child of in a way. So the reason why this happened was because one of the people who was in or is still involved in the Coleridge Initiative, Frauke Kreuter, she moved to the university here in Munich and started a similar initiative here and with a little bit of a different twist. So the way we work is a tad different from Coleridge, but the basic idea of supporting public offices with data science is still the same. So yeah, what we do is we solve real data science problems together with the public administration. And when I say real data science problems, I mean it because we don't like take any project. So the projects actually apply for working with us because we decided we want to not be a toy project kind of thing where people can show off that they do something with data and AI, but we'd rather work on projects where there's real problems to solve and where we can really have an impact. So that's something that's really important to us is really scoping the problem and figuring out what is it actually that you guys need. And then we don't go ahead and are like consultants that just solve the problem for them, but rather we find solutions together. We always say data science is a team sport and we need all hands on deck. So yeah, we don't offer solutions. We find the solutions as a team. And that also means learning collaboratively. I've been learning a lot about trees and gender equality reports in the past few months because I learn as much from the people in the public administration as they learn from us. So it's really, working together. And we also, like Coleridge, have a cloud infrastructure that we use for these projects because not always the data can be just downloaded on our computers. Oftentimes we work with very sensitive data, personnel data, court case data that can only, have limited sharing capabilities. And through that cloud infrastructure, we're able to make the data fair, but not open. All right, I want to talk about a few projects that we've been working on in ADA, and they're not like super related to what you do, but I think they're easy enough to understand and might give you some inspiration of what you could implement for your projects, or maybe also, give you some insights that, come from other fields that might be useful as well. All right, so our very first project that we did as part of ADA was archival of court cases. So we worked with the State Archives of Bavaria, and they asked the question, which court files do we need to archive? And I don't know what the state of court cases is in the US, but in Germany, at least up to now, court cases are on paper. And it's a big decision whether to archive like a big paper folder for forever or not. And in the past, they did it based on each single case. And now with our help, they went on to recognizing that the metadata that they have for the court files could be used to actually make decisions automatically of which court cases to be archived, because a lot of the decisions are around what cases do we archive out of the hundreds and hundreds of similar cases. There's like so many civil cases that are so similar, and you might want to archive one or two of those. So we help them do that based on the metadata. So the way they thought of data suddenly was that their metadata, so the data about the court cases, was also data that could be used. And now they can make the decision of archival transparent by doing it automatically and efficiently. So the process has gotten better, but also faster and easier. And so that's I find a nice example of rethinking metadata as data itself as well. Another project that we've been working on is on airborne data sets. So the national park here in Bavaria, they use drones to fly across the national park and take pictures, and with LiDAR sensors, they take information of the forest. And they had the problem that these data sets are very big, and doing modeling and computation on these data sets is highly computationally intensive. And public offices in Bavaria don't easily have access to cloud infrastructure. So this project was really about clarifying data storage and compute with them and making the data more fair by actually giving the offices the people in the offices themselves access and the ability to use the data, where before they had to wait hours and hours for the models to run on their local machine. So that was also an interesting way of thinking about fair data, as making it accessible and interoperable for yourself before you make it accessible and interoperable for other people. The final example that I want to talk about today, and I hope we have a little bit time for question afterwards, is the gender equality reports that we've been working on recently. And I think that might be something that's closer to what you're doing. I saw a lot of dashboards today in the presentations. And so you might be more aware of something like this. So in Bavaria, every public office that has more than 100 employees needs to create a gender equality report. And so far, each of these offices have thought about how to do that by themselves. So each of them had their own reporting system, their own way of collecting the data, their own way of analyzing the data. And that's possible. It might be good in some cases, but most of these people who create these reports, they're not data scientists, and they've not been trained at all to work with data. So it's very inefficient, very time consuming, and they have to discuss every time about each definition and what does it really mean and how do we actually write these reports. And so we've been able to help them think about in like really, really big workshops, because we had to get everybody on the same page of how should we collect the data in a similar way. So standardization was a big part of the process. And then also, how can we automate, or at least semi-automate, the data analysis process so that not each office has to really think about how do we analyze these data every single time, because these are hundreds of offices who are doing essentially the same task, just with different personnel data. So here, the idea of fairness really comes from following data standards and making it interoperable, making it reusable for future years, and not having to discuss about like the definitions every time. Yeah, so one thing that I've realized that's really an important bit about these projects is bringing public offices more sovereignty. So I feel like thinking about data and really being able to work with data themselves and not being in a vendor lock-in. And from like a consultancy who wants to be there forever for them, is a really big, important step. So I really love seeing how you guys are setting things up with dashboards and open source code. That's really, you're maybe a lot ahead of what we're doing here, but it's really cool to see. I'm gonna skip this part for now because I don't think it's that important, and I'd rather allow for some questions if you have any. But yeah, that's the that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. As always, I have comments, questions, but I want to not speak for other people. Does anybody else have a question or comment for Heidi?
Maybe you go with the first one and then people warm up.
Yeah. Well, I more of a comment, and I, just speaking with you before this meeting and then hearing your talk now, I mean, there's so many similarities about how I think about open science and how you think about it. And I just wanted to just briefly mention this concept of what's fair versus what's open. And I think you bring up a really good point about how like we can always just talk about the virtues of these things, but there's certain realities of different data sets and constraints of an individual that might have access to a data set but can't, like you rightfully mentioned, open it up to the broader sphere if there's real issues at play that prevents that from doing so. And so being mindful that there are real world limitations to doing open science and being fair and being open is like really critical in my mind to adopting these things because you've got to be pragmatic. You're not always going to check all of the boxes, and you're striving for that ideal, but it's impractical to try to get there. So when I talk about open science to people, and I think you would share this belief, is it's a spectrum, and moving in that direction is better than like trying to do it all. Like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And in
100%.
my mind, that's how I see progress being made in this field. So that's my only comment. And I'm glad I think you feel the same way.
Thank you. Yeah, I do. I do. Yeah, I always say I'm a pragmatic activist.
It's the name of the game.
Yeah. I saw a couple pictures pop up. Jason, I think you unmuted.
Yeah, I had a question. Really, I so have you worked much with academia, and can you talk a little bit about of your experiences in promoting philosophies in kind of that space? I would imagine that sometimes that's probably an easy thing, and sometimes really not.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So mostly I work with academia. So ADA is really the only project where I work with the public sector. And academia, I feel like is split sort of into parts. And then there's some people who have heard of fair data and are like totally on board. And then there's people and fields that are super far away from it. So it's really, yeah, I feel like it's also a generational thing that the more digital young generation, they find it easier to grasp. And for them, it's like clear, obviously, we want to make it interoperable and we don't want to use, I don't know, file types that nobody can read anymore. So yeah, I think we're slowly moving to getting people to think about fairness and think about openness more and more, but it's really a slow process.
Yeah, and I guess the question is it the chicken or the egg with that? Is it open first and then fair in that conversation? Because, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen that a bit.
I feel like that's different in different fields. So I did a lot of medical research and there open is like like a red flag from the beginning because like patient data you don't share openly. And I think you can. There's certain situations where you can, but there I always start the conversation on fair. Whereas if you talk to physicists, for them, open is like totally obvious. And then the fair conversation and like thinking about metadata and APIs and stuff like that comes more like second. So it depends a little bit on the field and who you talk to. There might also be physicists that are different, obviously, but I try to like start the conversation where it's easy and then move to the more difficult bits, if that makes sense. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank
No, I
you.
was just curious on your experiences, and yeah, I think you mentioned a generational thing. I mean, I've seen that a little bit, you know.
Mhm.
I think a lot of times with the funding now, it comes with the requirement of being open and sharing data. But I think it comes down to how willing, you know, folks are to do that, you know, because you can be required to do it, but that doesn't mean you make it easy.
Yeah, no, and I think being aware that it's not easy is part of the step, right? Because like now they make it required, but there's no support sometimes. And then the early career PhD candidate needs to figure out the mess. And yeah, uh, that's why I decided to leave academia actually and go into training and help researchers do better research rather than continuing to do research myself because I saw that and there was a lot of demand and people needed help because it's hard. It is hard. Yeah, I see people nodding.
Agree.
Well, I'll just shout out to the students if there's any here. That is the best time to learn these things because as you progress in your career, the less and less time you'll have to do it. So take advantage of that space you have available because it's just going to get more and more difficult. But I do, we're over time a little bit, and I want to be mindful of everyone else's time. I'm sure we could continue talking about this for quite some time. I know I could, but I want to I'll close out the meeting now. Thank you again to Heidi for giving this overview of her work, and thank you to Jay for an overview of T-Bon. Just quickly, in the next couple of days, I'll probably send an email out for next year's meeting dates. They are more than likely going to be held on the dates I have in the agenda. So June 24th and December 9th of next year. Let your friends know about this group. Invite a friend. The more people we have, the better. If you have any thoughts or ideas about speakers, topics, or just ways to improve these meetings, let myself or Alex know. But otherwise, I hope you have a good holiday and we'll see you in the next year. And I just want to thank everybody for coming to the meeting today and definitely to our speakers. So, Alex, anything else on your end?
No, I think that about sums it up. Thanks everybody for coming.
All right. Well,
See
we'll
you.
see you next year. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks
Bye.
all.